The news is constantly overwhelming us with tragedy, mostly terrorism and ISIS-related news, which is scary in its own way. Tack on election news and stories that we should be freaking out about make back-page news, maybe. Over the past 3 months, 2 ongoing stories that should have gotten just as much coverage as terrorist attacks and way more coverage than the elections have gone under the rug. However, with all the horrors going on in the world, our brains are exhausted, and if we do hear about it, we quickly ignore it because it's so awful, and we feel helpless, so our brains literally forget it as a defense mechanism to reduce depression. I know this has happened to me. I've been complaining about these news stories on my Facebook page, but didn't do any more than that. Just as I'm writing this, I really want to quit. 2 major stories that should be at the top of the news but have been ignored by the mainstream media for the last 3 months are the natural gas leak in California and the lead poisoning crisis in Flint, Michigan, that have been able to remain covered up from national attention with the election and terrorist attacks. Rachel Maddow, an alternative journalist, were the only people covering this. Maddow is pretty much the only American pundit I listen to, and I get most of my news from my Google News stream, BBC, Canadian CBC, German Deutsche Welle, and sometimes the Japanese NHK. I would listen to Al Jazeera, but they discuss too much truth, which is absolutely depressing and soul-crushing. Thank goodness for Maddow, or I would have been oblivious to both of these tragedies. The natural gas leak has displaced families, and it won't be stopped till March. The gas company is denying the level of health and environmental risks, and it is pumping out 1/5 the daily greenhouse gas emissions of the entire state of California, all because the gas company didn't feel like replacing a part and letting it rust out. This should be covered just as much as a BP oil spill, but we're bored of that story, while terrorists acutely killing a few people is way more sensational than a corporation chronically killing a lot more people. Instead, the media wants to just cover what crazy thing Donald Trump has said, raising his popularity even more as they're giving him free advertising. If not for Hillary Clinton using the media's election coverage attention of her presidential run, the Flint water crisis would still be ignored by the news, and the needed American outrage wouldn't be there, though apparently it's not enough to actually change the Michigan governor. For those who just heard about this recently, let me catch you up on what Michigan has been going through. It all started when Governor Rick Snyder passed a law removing all legal authority from the elected local government in financial crisis to be replaced with emergency managers, most of whom were cronies of the governor. There have been quite a lot of underhanded dealings that have been done, including selling stadiums for pennies on the dollar to their friends, siphoning revenues away from the city, ensuring they can't get out of crisis mode. They even tried to sell Detroit's extensive art collection, ensuring people would have even less interest in visiting Detroit than they already do. Luckily, the people of Detroit figured out a way to save their art, but just barely. There was actual annoyance and outrage from the local Michigan media that Rachel Maddow and a few other outlets reported on the emergency manager system, as they didn't see it as anything wrong and it was just a local thing. People tried to get the law revoked by ballot petition, and they got more than enough signatures, though a member of the organization that had proposed and were pushing the emergency manager laws was also sitting on the ballot petition board, and the board claimed the font size on the petition was too small. They finally got it on the ballot, and in 2012, 93% of Michigan voted to repeal the law. Snyder and the state government then tweaked the law and reauthorized it with the rule that the new version of the law could never be repealed by popular ballot. The emergency manager of Flint decided to save money by switching Flint over from Detroit water to Flint River water, which in and of itself was not a bad thing. But anyone who knows basic water or environmental chemistry can tell you river water is considerably more acidic than potable water from a plant. Had they run it through a treatment center, it would have been perfectly fine. But instead, to save $5 million, they ran it straight through the pipes from the river for 2 years. And within a few months, strange smells and colors began appearing in the water, and people started getting sick a lot more, had unexplained rashes, respiratory problems, and hair loss. It continued to get worse and worse over time, and the government began spreading ads telling people the water was completely safe to drink, even though anyone with eyes and a nose could tell you otherwise. People from the EPA began claiming that this was not true, and the state government quickly dismissed and disparaged their reputations and fired them. This summer, a doctor took it upon herself, with her own money, to do blood tests on a wide swath of kids and found that the blood levels were 7 times higher than federal action standards. The state government tried to damage her reputation and shut her up. More people from institutes and universities tested the levels and repeated the experiments and found horribly high levels of lead and other dangerous chemicals and metals. It wasn't until November that the governor began to weaken his stance, in December that he finally admitted the levels were too high, yet still refused to declare a state of emergency until Hillary made the rest of the media aware of it on the Rachel Maddow show. On top of this, we found out that the government workers were told that the water wasn't up to spec, and they were given bottled water as an alternative. The water is eaten through both the lead and galvanized pipes. They finally switched back over to Detroit water and are using a phosphate treatment to hopefully provide a seal coating on most of the pipes to get the lead pipes down to at least bathing level with filters that need changing every 2 weeks, and galvanized pipes to safe drinking levels. But with all the corrosion, it's estimated that it will take at least $10,000 for each household to swap out all the lead pipes in the city, and most people's houses aren't even worth $10,000 in that area. However, Monday, the city announced that the filters may not work because new findings show that some houses, even after the phosphate treatment is too high for the filters to work. And the governor, instead of sending people out to test the lead in the water, is requiring people to go to their local fire station, many without cars, where they already have to go to get bottled water rations, which they have to walk home carrying water like they're in a third world nation, then bring the kit back and find out a few days later if the pipes might have too much lead. Why do we still have lead pipes? Because our water system is set up to be replaced every 300 years. So some areas actually still use wood pipes, and each large city has a water line rupture every day because of it. We need to replace it every 100 years, but that would make water more expensive, and since we're so used to buying cheap water unlike the rest of the world, it's gonna be a while. The total disaster will cost around several billion for a town where 40% were in poverty to begin with. The children will need treatment and monitoring, and many will probably end up in prison because of their inability to have proper impulse control, anger control, and lowered IQ, a phenomena believed to have impacted violence and aggression rates from the 50s to 70s thanks to the exhaust from leaded gasoline cars. Also, just getting these kids jobs are going to be difficult because their IQs will probably be a bit lower. On top of this, nearly 10 people have died of Legionnaire's disease because scientists think that the metal particles bonded to the chlorine in the water that would normally kill the bacteria. This is a huge reason why I pay zero attention to conspiracy theorists. If they had a real methodology for finding conspiracy by the government, they would have spotted this a real government conspiracy and raised hell. Instead, they go after the federal government, science, or the UN, which we know is really porous these days with all the leaks, and then scream about conspiracies about climate change, aliens, 9/11, fluoride, Benghazi, Jade Helm, and chemtrails. The worst thing about this mess is there was really no reason for it to have happened, yet the governor shows zero real remorse, takes no blame for it, praises himself and his government for the little they have done so far, fights the federal government at every step of the way, while claiming the federal government isn't doing enough, tries to share the blame with the city government, who had nothing to do with it because they didn't have any power, and refuses to release a crucial year of emails, and touts the emails he has released as above and beyond the call of duty, as Michigan is one of the 2 states that doesn't have a Freedom of Information Act. And can you guess where this emergency manager law idea came from? An agency owned and funded by the Koch brothers. The thing is, they got away with this for so long because the media has this completely disaster fatigue that we can't even begin to compare things we can fix and prevent from things we can't, and how likely something is to harm us directly. A business and a business-owned state government did things that ISIS and Al-Qaeda could only dream of doing to an American city, and most of America knows nothing about these tragedies, thanks to the media knowing we are at our disaster fatigue limit, and now you won't change the way you think about voting over something as horrible as this.